Gradient means a transition from either dark to light or light to dark or a color to another color. And you want it seamless so you don't see any lines in between. So if we were starting with our darkest values, I'm going to start with my orange ones, and I'm adding in, I might even go slightly darker. When I add my gloss glazing liquid, I want so much gloss into my paint that you could actually see the palette underneath. And that is how I would begin. Sometimes I even kind of work a little bit down and make sure like that is looking a little bit better to me, to be honest. And I would just try to find, so I know this area right here is very dark because I added a lot of hatch marks. So I'd go in and just add in my darkest values. Now this is called blocking in. As you can tell, I'm using a flat brush. You can use a round brush, but you shouldn't use anything too small or detailed than this just to begin with. You could potentially use a round brush that is bigger. This one still may be too small, but for this, you know, canvas or this size of a canvas, this would be okay too. Blocking in values means you're just basically finding the areas that are like the most dark, and you kind of just lay in the paint a little bit like splotchy like that, okay? And I would do that. This one looks like we have a little bit more darker values here, and I can't even see my white transfer here. It's like impossible. So that is something similar to here. I can barely even see my gray transfer. It's easier to see on camera than it is to the naked eye. But here is a great example. I can see a lot of shadows right here. I'm going to show you what it looks like to block in dark values with my cobalt blue. That would be at the bottom of the scale. And I'm going to do the same thing over here and block in my dark values onto this hair. And I'm just going to make it up. I'm just going to do some blue dark values here as well. It can look like this. It doesn't have to be completely smooth in the beginning. Right now, this is going to be a little bit more high contrast as well. Like by high contrast means like the darkest values as well as the lightest values, because the more layers that you add on top of it, it will just begin to soften a little bit because you are adding so many layers, to the point that in the end you may even have to go back in and add some of these dark values back into it because you've lost it along the way. So when you're working in the beginning, it's okay to go a little bit heavy with your darkest values. And I think that's looking good. All right, so now I'm going to show you how you would block in the darkest values here with your grayscale. Same thing, I'm looking for my darkest value down here, and I'm going to add some glaze. I'm going to bring it down here so you guys can see. Might even make it a little darker. And I knew that I had a lot of hatch marks here, so I'm going to go in and just sort of begin shaping it. Now the gray is very dark. Can you see that? So I'm going to add I'm actually going to go pure black with my gloss glazing liquid. And it's still wet, like really wet, since I just did it a second ago. I'm just going to go back in and make that a little bit darker in value here. All right, so how do we create a transition from this darkest value to a lighter value? You're going to move up the scale. You could even skip a value because it will all soften out in the end. I wanted to show you a little bit of a trick with my blending brushes. Okay, these are two examples of blending brushes. One is a little bit smaller and one is bigger. This one is more of a mop brush because it comes out. This one is like a round blending brush because it comes more to a point, but both of them are super soft on the ends. So how this can be really helpful is when you are painting and you want to soften this, like maybe you don't like this texture right off the bat, you know? What you would do is keep your main brush in your painting hand. So why don't we use this round brush real quickly. And what I would do is lay in a little bit of paint, and then as soon as I'm done laying it in, you can take your blending brush and really kind of just soften it out. A lot of times you would use this just to soften the edges of your paint, but if you're thinking about doing this for like every single layer, you can imagine how nice it's going to build up for a flesh tone. And I'm just going to add another layer on top of that. Sort of blend out. You tap it as well. And it really just kind of softens the edges out if I wanted to do it that way as well. Never wet your blending brush. Make sure it's always dry, but make sure it's clean. This one doesn't look very clean. I don't think I washed it since the last painting session. And also make sure you're never taking your blending brush and trying to blend something that is almost dry, because it will just like, I don't know if you can tell, but it's creating this effect right here. I do this a few times in my portraits, in my painting demonstrations, and I point it out as well so you can see when I am doing that. I want to make sure I always show my mistakes so you don't end up doing it, but that does not look good. It will pull the paint up quite literally. Okay, so another way that you can blend your values together is something called a padding method. And this is really just how I paint. So when you think of painters, you think of them doing like long brush strokes, then they do another one and they just flawlessly blend together. That is not how I paint. The only time I really do long brush strokes is for long chunks of hair, maybe some like articles of clothing that have really long lines. But if I'm working on anything else, really, even skin tone, I use something called a padding method, where when I'm putting the paint in, let's start with our orange, our cadmium orange. I'm gonna add some glaze to this. Okay, so I'm gonna create like a little bit of a value from my light to dark. So when I start with my, the padding method, I kind of pat the paint in sort of like this and bring the line anywhere I want it to go by doing, it's almost like a dotted line. And all I'm doing is pat, 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 all the way down. And I think it does a pretty good job of making your brush strokes look a little bit better than something like this, where they're kind of all over the place. These look like they're blending a little bit better, to the point where it's almost like, I don't know, it looks really good. And then from here, if I wanted to move up my value scale, I would make sure that you're always washing and drying your brush before applying your layer. If you have water in your brush, then it's going to dilute your paint and it's going to dilute the gloss glazing liquid. All right, so why don't I move on to this one that we started? And I'm going to kind of pat it in a little bit next to it. There is a line there, do you see that? It's not that big of a deal. You can kind of like pat on top of it as well if you want to. And the two will blend together. But really what we're starting to do now, what you're starting to see is creating a little bit of a gradient from my darkest one to the lightest one. And I might even go a little bit darker on this side. So why don't I go back with these and I'm using a Filbert brush. I love using Filbert brushes and round brushes to pat in. I just like the softness of how it curves on the top. So it's not, I'm not getting like any jagged lines that I would probably get with a flat brush. Why don't we do, we're gonna jump up to our pure pigment orange. I usually start with a 1-to-1 ratio, and then if I feel of paint to gloss glazing liquid, and then if I feel like I need more gloss, and I can do that. Pat, 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 pat. It does not look perfect. It doesn't have to. Remember, because we're doing this in layers, it's going to soften out as we go. All right, I'm going to go a little bit quicker now. I'm going to jump up a little bit, add some gloss glazing liquid. All right, and it is starting to create a little bit of a transition. There is kind of a big gap right here that I would have to work on later, but I won't work on this section here where that line is until everything is dried and I can do a second layer. All right, let's do our grayscale values. We're gonna do something very similar, working from light to dark, and I am just going to create a little bit of like kind of a roundish shape here. So you can see this one is kind of long brush strokes, maybe for like hair or something. And then we'll go a little bit lighter and add our gloss glazing liquid. I'm just gonna start patting this in. If you lay it on top, will make everything appear a little bit darker as well, because if you think of transparency, when you lay transparency on top of transparency, then it's just going to look more opaque, more dark. Since all of this really is still wet, I could kind of work it all the way out to the ends. So I'm not getting a huge transparency at this moment. It would look different on the gray paper, so why don't I do it there now? Go a little bit lighter. And at this very moment in time, I think it might be wise to use a blending brush to kind of use a smaller, here's a smaller version of it, and I'm just going to kind of pat these in. This one you may be able to see a little bit better because we're only focusing on our highlights, midtones, and shadows. So you can really see a dark here and how it transitions into your light. So why don't we just make this, I know that we drew that in as a shadow, but for the sake of this lesson, I am going to pretend that is a highlight. And we are just going to add a very light value of our grayscale in here. All right, so that I think you can see a little bit better than these at the moment. So I'm gonna let that one dry. Let's see how we're doing here. This is super tacky, so I wouldn't want to paint over this. This is still tacky too. Let's see how with these up here. This one is almost dry. We did that one in the beginning. So why don't we do a second layer on top of this one? That looked like our blue. And I'm gonna do a little bit of a lighter value and start to work my way around here. I can even go over the whole thing and darken that if I wanted to. Okay, so this, we just talked about gradients. When it comes time to your painting, honestly, you really could just use like either a pure pigment black mixed with a little bit of your local, of the hue that you're using to do all of your darkest values first. Because as I said before, it's best to go in and find all your shadows and just get those in. And then if you wanted to do a value scale after that and start focusing on your midtones and your highlights, you could do that as well. This way it allows all of that, the darkest values, the darkest colors to dry so that you can start adding on additional layers. But one thing I did want to show you is that the color that we did for our background is still shining through, as you can tell. And you don't have to cover up your entire background. The great thing about having paint on your background is if any of it does shine through in spots more than others, at least there's color there. This one, because it is all filled in with a gray neutral gesso, then when you're focusing only on highlights, midtones, and shadows, with the midtone kind of being that neutral gray, it makes your job a lot easier because really you only need to focus on shadows and highlights. And that might be something a lot more beneficial for you if you are just starting off as an artist and you're a beginner. Okay, so I will see you in the next video.